So good morning, everybody, both in person and online. Glad to have you guys here today. My name is Christina Motley. I'm a senior environmental specialist with Maryland Environmental Service, and I work at the Paul S. Sarbanes Ecosystem Restoration Project at Poplar Island. So Poplar Island is an international model of beneficial use. We're pretty much the first of our kind. A lot of outside delegations from across America and actually across the world will come to us to see what we're doing, to see if they can implement something where they're at. So we are a project that's primarily funded by two main project partners. We have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which they fund 75% of the project. And then we are, the remaining 25 is with the Maryland Port Administration. So it's definitely a project with a lot of hands on it, and I'll be talking a little bit about that as we go on. But when we first talk about Poplar Island, we actually like to go back in time to the year 1847. And the reason we like to go back to the year 1847 is that's when they conducted the first land survey on the island, where they measured the area of the land. And at that time, they found that the island was about 1,140 acres in size. Fairly large island. During the late 1800s, early 1900s, it housed a town called Valiant. It was a town of about 10 farms. There was a schoolhouse / church. There was a general store. There was a post office. There was a sawmill. There were about 100 individuals living at that town. However, by the 1920s, everybody on the island had to move off the island due to erosion. It was estimated that they were losing about 15 to 20 feet per year, so the water was pretty much coming up to their doorstep. We can attribute that to a lot of the deforestation going on, as well as just practices back then. The one thing that really prevents a lot of erosion is a really established root system. So when you have sawmill on the island, that kind of takes away the root system, and then when wind, waves, and rain happen, it has something to hold the soil together, so it very quickly erodes away. So the island went through a variety of different owners between then. During the early 1900s, it was owned by the Democratic National Party, and it just continued to erode away throughout all the owners of the island. So much so that once we get to our next day that we like to focus on in 1993, we found that the island had shrunk to less than 5 acres in size. And that 5 acres weren't even one continuous island. They were split between these 4 tiny, what we call remnant islands. It was estimated that if the island were to continue this way, it would be completely eroded away by the year 2000. So just to give you a little bit of an example of the drastic change in the landscape of the island, you can see we have a map here that shows the 1847 footprint, and then we have the 1993 footprint with those 4 tiny remnant islands that we have there. So it was very much, looking like Poplar Island was going to be washed away. However, if we look at Poplar Island today, it looks like this. So we're a little bit bigger and completely washed away, so we were able to find a solution. And that solution actually comes from one of Maryland's most important cities, the Port of Baltimore. So the reason why the Port of Baltimore is so important is because, so appealing to a lot of big corporations is because we're the most inland port on the eastern seaboard. We've been hearing a lot about how important the Port of Baltimore is in the news lately. So we are the closest port to the Midwest. So that means that it is 150 miles. These big corporations don't have to worry about land travel. It's much more quicker and much more efficient to travel by water than it is by land. Just to give you an idea of some of the economics of the Port of Baltimore, we have over 30,000 direct induced indirect jobs, over 100,000 related jobs in Maryland. Just shy of 140,000 jobs related to port activities. We get $33 billion in wages and salary annually, and then $335 million in state and local tax revenues annually. So the Port of Baltimore is #1 in the nation of small cars and trucks. We also are #1 in the roll-on and roll-off of heavy equipment, so a lot of farming equipment that comes into the nation from other countries will come to the Port of Baltimore. #1 in imported sugar and gypsum, and #2 in exported coal. Can't be #1 in everything. So Port of Baltimore is a huge economic drive, so we want to make sure we keep the Port of Baltimore open for business. However, between the Atlantic Ocean and the Port of Baltimore, we have the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is a fairly shallow body of water. So the biggest of the largest cargo ships need about 50 feet of water, 50 feet of draft in order to go through effectively. Now, 21 feet deep is the average depth of Chesapeake Bay. That doesn't really meet up very well with that 50 feet that we need for those cargo ships. So we need to do a process called dredging, where we dredge out the shipping channels to keep them deep enough for those cargo ships to go through. However, it's not a one and done type thing. Just naturally, we need to do maintenance dredging on those channels because sedimentation will occur and accumulate on the bottom of those shipping channels. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what that looks like. I have a little video here.
Over time, wind, tides, and runoff cause sediments to accumulate, which could block shipping channels. The process of periodically clearing the material from shipping channels is referred to as maintenance dredging. To maintain the channel's proper depth, a clamshell bucket and crane barge are used to remove sediment and place it in a flat-bottom scow, which is then towed away to a containment facility. In order to protect the marine environment, maintenance dredging typically takes place in fall and winter. Approximately 5 million cubic yards are cleared from the Chesapeake Bay channels each year. Of that, 1.5 million cubic yards are removed from the Baltimore Harbor alone.
So, we have to dredge out 5 million cubic yards every year. To put that in perspective, that's about, if you went to Baltimore, went to the M&T Bank Stadium, that material is enough to fill that stadium to the brim twice. So we need to make sure we have places to put it. So, historically, our first site that we placed this material was Hart Miller Island. It's an island just northeast of Baltimore City, and it was the first of our kind. We used it as what we call our dredged material containment facility, where we just placed the material onto that island. And it's where we got the initial winding of the channel materials when we increased the channel depth a couple decades ago.
So is that completely man-made?
That is a little bit restored. So if you look at, let's see if I can, okay. So if you look at this area, pretty much right here, on the, for those online, it is in the kind of the northwest corner of the island. You'll see it kind of wonky. So any place that doesn't look like straight lines, like you see here, that's part of the remnant. So Hart Miller Island was actually 2 islands, Hart and Miller, and then also way back when there was another island that's very close by called Pleasant that was involved in it. So they just pretty much restored Hart and Miller Island, and just like Poplar Island, it historically was over 1,000 acres large. So then Hart Miller Island received its last bit of dredge material in 2009, so we needed to find other places to place it. So we have Poplar Island, which is kind of Hart Miller's successor island, and we are a beneficial use project. We are using this dredge material to restore habitat. So that kind of differentiates us from Hart Miller, where Hart Miller was pretty much a containment facility. They kind of didn't really focus on habitat restoration until after they received all their dredge material. Hart Miller Island is also an active recreation site. If you have any boats, you can bring boats there. There's a DNR facility there where you can bring your boat. There's a nice beach there. They do 5Ks there. The South Cell is owned by Maryland DNR, and they do it's a lot of great birding. Actually, a lot of great birding at all of our sites. So we have Poplar Island here, and we only get material from what we call the approach channels. At the end of the Catskill River, which is the river that goes into the Port of Baltimore, there's an imaginary line called North Point Rock Point Line. Anywhere there below is material we get. So anywhere there above, and that's more into the Baltimore Harbor area, we have 2 other dredge material containment facilities that we will deposit material to. We have Masonville Cove, the dredge material containment facility, and they're using that material for innovative reuse. Actually, both of these sites will be using the material for innovative reuse. And that is just using the dredge material in a way that can be used for something else. So for Masonville's case, they're using that dredge material to create more parking for the roll-on, roll-off small cars and trucks. It's right next to a lot where they store a lot of the cars that they had imported or get to export. Actually, Mercedes-Benz lot. And so they're filling that up to accommodate for that. And then we have Cox Creek, which is just under Port Carroll over there. And Cox Creek is using it kind of as a rolling innovative reuse site. So they're using it for things like landfill caps, using material for that. Apparently they use material from Cox Creek to create the top golf course in Baltimore. And then they're using things to create like bricks and other construction materials, as well as there's a new company that's working with them to create rock grease. Yeah.
Is dredge, or is there high quality dredge, low quality dredge?
Yeah.
That you don't want to touch?
It depends on where you're taking it. So we only get dredge material from the shipping channels. So there's dredging going all around the state in various different companies and different projects that they're doing. Some of them are, digging down a little deeper or getting into new material. Some of them are doing smaller sites, like we have like rivers and creeks. They have smaller channels that are more local that they do dredging that we're not part of. So depending on where that is, that can kind of determine what that dredge material can be used for and where it can be deposited. So actually Maryland DNR has a great website. If you look at like dredge material, Maryland DNR, they have a good website showing like all the dredging projects in Maryland and then where they're placed and stuff like that. So that's a really good website there. For us, we don't really have any worries about our dredge material. What really helps us is, at the moment, the dredge material we get is fairly new material. It's just sedimentation that we have to continuously dredge out. So since it's fairly new material, we're not digging down deep to the material that was there prior to when we had things like the Clean Water Act. So since we're a little better with environmentalism here, that helps us out a lot. Now, the reason why Poplar Island gets the approach channels and Masonville and Cox Creek gets the harbor channels is one, there's the idea that, the channels in the harbor is a little bit more industrialized. And two, it's mainly because of location. So it's the majority of the cost of dredging is transporting that dredge material to and from wherever the channel is to where it's being deposited. So just having sites within the harbor is just a lot more cost effective. But the dredge material does get tested once every 3 years, and we have certain standards set by the Maryland Department of the Environment. To date, it has never exceeded those standards. Now, it's set for what they're using it for. So the harbor material is set for innovative reuse, and so it has a little bit of a different qualifications than what our dredge material has, because we're using it for beneficial use.
Is there any archaeological interest in what's dredged or?
Not really. Again, it's fairly new material, so we don't really get any old stuff in there. Every now and then, like Hart Miller, since it did get deeper into the older material, it does have a lot of stuff that they'll find on the beaches, mainly old bottles. Every now and then we have to look for what we call unexploded ordnances.
Oh.
Because we had way back when they just threw all the munitions in the bay. So, but yeah, so we sometimes every now and then get that. Since I've been there, it's only I've only known the Poplar's been going on for over 20 years. We've only had 2. So, and that's just something that you'll find just in the bay in general. Just not really floating around, but it'll come up every now and then wherever you're at.
Do they use dredge material for covering garbage dumps?
Yes. Yeah, it's a lot of landfill caps they'll use dredge material for.
What's the consistency of the material? Is it basically like mud or what?
It depends on where the channel is, but it's primarily silty clay. So
And that plastic, I would think it'd be full of plastic.
I would have to look at what inorganic material would be in there, but just the soil composition itself is silty clay. So.
That's right. $1,000
So back to Poplar Island. So when Poplar Island first started, the project team came up with 3 main goals that they wanted to make sure were meeting at any point of the project process. So the first one of those goals that we're going to talk about is optimizing the placement capacity for the dredge material. This island would not exist without the need to beneficially use that dredge material from those shipping channels. And all the channels in in Maryland, we don't do a practice called open placement, where we just take the dredge material out of the bottom of the water and place it somewhere else in the water. We don't do that, one, because there's this idea that that may not be the best idea for marine wildlife, but the main reason is there's not really any place to put it in the water. Now, they are talking about, looking at confined aquatic disposal sites within the water, but that's completely different. I don't know much about that, unfortunately. But for optimizing place capacity on island, what we do is first, we will build the perimeter of the island. We kind of look at it like a puzzle. So we build the outline of the island first, and we build it primarily out of sand. Like I mentioned before, the dredged material that we get is primarily silty clay. And silty clay is not the most stable of material. So it's one of the reasons why Poplar Island was chosen is because it has a really good sand deposit there. So we used that sand deposit that we dredged out of what would have been the footprint of the island, did that to create the perimeter of it, and then where we took out the sand, we were just going to put more dredged material in.
Has that protected the island from rising water?
So one of the things we do is with the perimeter, we do armor it. So we have that armor stone there. That stone is completely covering the perimeter of the island, except for where it's at with Coach's Island, but that's not really well. And those stones can range from 200 to 4,000 pounds. And those stones are very specifically quarried. They're very specifically placed, and they're actually very specifically quality checked. It's actually one dude's job to look at every single one of those rocks to make sure they meet our quality standards. And it's estimated that once we do that, we have about 150 years until those rocks start seeing the effects of erosion.
So are those rocks different than normal riprap then?
Yes. So riprap usually is, they're not really as meticulous about how to cut and quarry out of the quarry, and then riprap usually is only about 150 pounds at most.
But I thought that was contrary to what the environmentalists talk about when they talk about a living shore. That's exactly what they don't want.
Exactly. So we have been talking about potentially shifting to living shorelines, but that's after we are establishing the habitat there.
So first stabilize and
Yes.
then revitalize.
Yeah, and it's just because a lot of it has to do with the research that has been put out there. Again, we're the first of our kind. We want to make sure we're able to place material on it first before we're able to, then move on to new environmental stuff. But we have been doing some stuff with living shorelines, and we work with like the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and a lot of other organizations who are involved in living shorelines. And so it's definitely on our mind to start integrating that in as when we can. So when they build the perimeter with that armor stone, they actually layer it. So first they'll do what we call a toe dike, which is what you see on the edge of the picture there. So that just kind of breaks up the undercurrent on the island. And then they'll place layers of geotextile fabric, the sand, and then that armor stone, and leave the final armor stone, the largest of the armor stone that I mentioned earlier, on the perimeter. So it's a pretty extensive process, but it's really fun to look at. There we go. So after we're ready after we're done with the perimeter of the island, we're ready to receive the materials. Just like the video said, to get the dredged material out of the bottom of the bay, we use the clamshell buckets they look exactly how they sound, big clamshell looking buckets that scoop the dredged material out from the bottom of the bay, place them in the flat bottom boat called a scow, and then the scow will tug that material over to Poplar Island. So after it is on Poplar Island, it will then be attached to what we call one of our unloaders, and then it's mixed in with water. So a little bit of a video there showing that. And the reason why we do that is the island, especially in certain areas of the island, is fairly shallow. So we can't really put that scow right next to whichever area is receiving that material. So what we do is we mix it in with water. When I talk about it with kids, I compare it to chocolate milk. If you have a glass and you put a good squirt of chocolate syrup in it, if you have a straw, it's really hard to get that chocolate up. So you have to mix it in with milk to get that nice chocolate material. I would not drink this. So we mix it in with water. It's about a 90% water, 10% dredged material solution. And then after it's mixed up, we will then hydraulically pump it to whichever cell is receiving that material. So after it gets pumped to whichever cell is receiving the material, we'll then let it settle out. So the dredged material will settle to the bottom, the water will be on top. And then we will go through a process called dewatering, where we don't need that water anymore. And we will dry out that sediment as much as we can through a process that we call crust management. So what we'll do is we have certain structures that will allow the water to go in and out of the cell. And then we will dry it out as much as we can. And that helps us two ways. One, it helps us with our capacity, the more water we take out of the material, the more dredged material we can then place on top. And also it compacts it so that our specialized machinery will be able to go on. We have some places on the island, we just did a inflow of dredged material this past winter, and it does look like that. However, I would not walk on it because if it hasn't been drying for a good while, it acts kind of like creme brulee. So it's like a nice crust on the top and then dew on the bottom. And
So how do they, when they've got that pipe that's pushing that material in, how do they move it around? Does it automatically just float to where you want it, or?
so with the dredge, we place the pipe in certain areas wherever it's being placed. So we have a team that sells. So we'll place it in a way that it will flow to where we want it to go. So with this cell right here, this is kind of the north end of the cell, and on the south end of the cell, that's where we have our spillway, where we have things open up. So since we're putting it on the northern part of the cell, it kind of creates a slope. So that water will just naturally go to where we want to go with the spillway. So we'll do that in various places. And then with the pipes themselves, we'll move, if we need be, we'll move them with heavy machinery.
A lot of physics involved.
Oh, it's so overly engineered. So the capacity of Poplar Island is about 68 million cubic yards. We get about 2 million cubic yards per year. That can vary depending on which channel we're dredging that year, as well as how correct our surveys were previously. There's some years where we are expecting a certain amount and we get a little bit less, and then some years where we actually turn out to get a little bit more. And then some years where a boat dries itself out of a channel, and then we have to drag it out. Yeah. So. Okay. So our next goal is we want to make sure we are restoring the remote island habitat for our animals here. So remote island habitat is very important to our animals. Since we are separated from the mainland, we're separated from a lot of the mainland hazards and a lot of the mainland predators. So a lot of the animals will be attracted to these sites as sort of a sanctuary. This is especially true for our migratory animals. So we have a map of the United States here, and if you look at where the Atlantic Flyway is, look at where Poplar Island is, we're pretty much right smack dab in the middle of that flyway. So a lot of our animals will use Poplar Island as sort of a stopover point. Just like when we go on a long road trip, we have to stop to rest and refuel, animals need to do the same thing. And so that's why these remote islands are so important. So I have a handful of our migratory birds that we might see that you guys may not see on the trip where we go to the island. So in the top left corner, we have long-tailed duck. Those are really pretty. In the center top, we have our snowy owls. So every now and then we'll get what we call eruption years, where the population of snowy owls in the Arctic are so enormous at that time that in order to find food, they tend to go further and further south. So when we have an eruption year, it's pretty much either us or Assateague that will get the first snowy owl. Pretty cool at that.
Have you done one yet?
Well, we didn't get one this year because it wasn't an eruption year. In 2018, we had like 4, and then 2019, we had one. 2020, we had one for like 4, but like one day. It was a day that I wasn't there. 2021, I don't think we had one. I think we had one in 2022. Because 2023, we didn't have one.
What defines an eruption year?
So eruption is when, the population just does really, really well. There's a lot of food up there, and so when the owls nest and they raise their young, a lot of the young is able to survive, just because the food is so plentiful. But after the kids grow up, the parents don't want them anymore. So they'll like, get out on your own way. And so since it's cold up there, when it gets to winter time, the food gets more scarce. And in order to find the food and in order to get out of the territories that the adults are kicking them out of, they will spread more down south. And then we have a snow bunting. They're like toasted marshmallows. The bottom left corner, we have windburrels. Those are birds that a lot of the birders are very interested in. They come for like one day and they leave. The one day was last week. And then we have, every now and then we get our piping plovers, which are really rare. This guy was a little Cooper. He was banded, and we were able to look up his band, and we actually had a nice story with him. He was found orphaned, and then they raised him, and then they released him, and he's been nesting periodically. So seeing him on our island was really fun because he was on his way to Florida to nest. And then we have our tundra swans that get up here. We usually get a couple hundred tundra swans every year. So we get a lot of migratory animals onto the island. As well as migratory animals, we actually have nesting birds on the island. And so we have certain species that we're targeting and that we're creating habitat specifically for, and some that we're just utilizing the habitat that just so happens to be on our construction site. So the top two, from the left to the right, we have our tern species. So we have our common tern, which is the one in the upper left corner, and then we have our least terns. So common terns are endangered in the state of Maryland. Least terns are threatened. And on Poplar Island, we have the largest least and common tern colonies in the Chesapeake Bay portion of Maryland for the last 10 years or so. So we're really happy to have them there, helping them out with their populations. If you're in the eastern area, oftentimes the least terns will nest on the top of the acme. In the top right corner, we have our bank swallows. We're the only place in Talbot County that the bank swallows will nest. So I mentioned that sand. So since we have a lot of sand on the island, we get a lot of the sandy sheer cliffs. These guys love to nest in there, so it's pretty good to have them out. We also have our snowy egret in the bottom left corner. They are another species that will create specific habitat for. We've had an egret heronry on the island for many, many years, and we usually get about 300-400 egrets pairs on the island. So we're pretty happy about that. The center on the bottom, we have our osprey. We don't see any of those. But in Maryland and actually in the Chesapeake Bay, we have the highest concentration of osprey in the world. So we want to make sure we have habitat for them. So if you're out on the island, we have about 20 or so osprey platforms. And this year, last I heard, we had about 20 active nests. So we don't get them all on the platform. Some of them are on some of our other structures that we have, and you'll see them. We have another video that you guys will be able to see them. And then we have, in the bottom right corner, we have our black-necked stilts on the island. And according to eBird, we have the highest population of nesting black-necked stilts in Maryland. So, and that number is increasing every year. We're constantly getting new birds that are nesting onto the island. So, for the habitat of the island, we're kind of creating different habitat on the island. So initially, we wanted the island to be a historical acreage of 1,140 acres. However, the Port of Baltimore and, all the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they have to have a 20-year plan of where they're going to place the dredge material. So it is much easier to add on to an existing project than create a new one. So in 2017, we were able to add on our 575-acre expansion to the island to bring our total acreage to 1,715. Now, the reason we were able to add it on is because we did actually sediment sampling around the island, and I don't know the technical stuff that they did, but they were able to prove that the island was actually much larger in its history prior to 1847. It's actually closer to 2,000 acres. So we added on that 575-acre expansion onto the island. Now, the island has three distinct types of habitat. We have our upland habitat, which looks like that at the moment, because that is where we will be planting our forest areas, our meadows, what we call shrub, maybe some freshwater ponds, but they are much higher in elevation than other parts of the island. They're about 25 feet. So since every lift we usually only get maybe 1 to 2 feet of material every year, it takes a lot longer to fill it up. So we're just not quite there yet with our upland cells. They actually just did a meeting Monday. It's been a long week. And they say that our planting of the first upland cell is going to be around 2030. And then we have our wetland cells, which we have been able to restore because they don't need that much material. And we're mainly restoring saltmarsh habitat, and we've been able to restore just shy of 400 acres of wetland habitat on the island. And then we have our open water embayment habitat, which you see right there, which is just a habitat that we created in collaboration with NOAA, where it's just a summer-protected water area for our fish species. Because they were worried about us, taking away the good water habitat for the animals by restoring the land habitat. So we wanted to make sure we had an area for the fish to benefit as well.
You've been using the term animal, but we're not going to see squirrels and bears and chipmunks. Do those guys live there?
No, so we don't have, we don't have a lot of again, that goes with the mainland animals and habitats. So we don't have any squirrels, we don't have any rabbits. We don't have any, for the predators, we don't have any raccoons or foxes on the island.
Good.
And they're the ones who would eat all the common tern, eggs and everything. We do have deer on the island.
Of course.
Can't get rid of them. And then we have, the other mammals we have muskrat, we'll have dolphin that'll swim around, which is really, it's magical when they show up. And then, we have mice and voles.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
What are your
always show up.
snakes? You have snakes?
We do have snakes,
So
yeah, we have,
that's good, you need a few.
yeah, we have, the main ones we have on the island are northern water snakes, and then we have black rat snakes, which they eat the mice, which is great.
Right.
And then we have the eastern king snakes, which you don't see that often around. I love them because they're the top of the snake hierarchy, and they will eat other snakes as well as,
They're snake eaters.
That's my favorite.
and they're actually also impervious to other snake venom. They don't have any venomous snakes on the island though. So, and then we have a couple of other rare ones. We've seen a couple of rough green snakes, which are pretty rare. So that was really cool to see.
So how did, like, the mice get there?
We have those remnant islands, yeah, there's probably some accidental introduction going on there, but we did have the remnant islands, there were probably a couple hanging out there. And then we have our neighboring islands, like Coach's Island only got like 10 feet away, so you can probably, swim there, or maybe like something brought it over and dropped it, and then mice just do their mice thing.
Same with the deer?
Yeah, the deer there's probably a population on Coach's Island, and they just swim over. They do. They have a very good swimmers. They eat grass, and in order to digest the grass, they're very gassy. When you're a very gassy animal, and you're on the water, you kind of have your own personal energy. So when we're restoring the habitat, what we'll do is for our wetlands, we will dig out channel systems. We'll grade the elevation depending on what plants we're going to be planting there. And then we will open the cell back out to the bay with a tidal inlet. So here we have some examples of our box culverts. So we have on the island what we call lessons learned, where we have done things in the past that didn't really work out, or we've got some new information so that we could do better in the future. And one of the lessons learned is in our first cell we ever put online, we made the openings with small pipes. And that was really good for water flow to go in and out of there. However, the fish were terrified of them. So it's not really helpful to us as a wetland without any fish in it. So just in our subsequent cells, we just created these box culverts that are about 6 feet wide in the openings, and that allows the fish to not be too scared to go in through, and also allows the larger predatory fish to come in. So it helps create a more established environment. And I have seen a lot of fish coming in there. So once we are done with all that, we're then ready for planting. I heard one of you is very familiar with that. So every single one of the wetland grasses you see that are in our wetland cells are hand planted. Within our cells, we have in between 200,000 to over 400,000 individually planted plant plugs. And so historically, we've had volunteers from the National Aquarium come out. We've had contractors come out to plant. So it is a pretty big process, but it really does show the results are a lot better. So to show that a little bit, I have this cell 1C. So this is what it was before it, well, just when it was freshly planted, you kind of see a little bit of little stubbles in it. Yeah, 1C this was in 2011. So we have May, so it's 1 month after planting, you can see a little bit coming through. And then we have June, getting very established. And by July,
Amazing.
Wow.
yes.
Amazing.
And then you have August, September, October,
You don't add
November.
fertilizer or anything like that.
Nothing.
Just the junk from the bottom.
Yeah.
2011.
yeah,
Took a picture from
It-
further
this is-
years.
That's June
That's
20th of 2011.
Oh.
yeah. So it doesn't take long at all for that grass to establish itself. And what you mentioned with the dredge material, with the fertilizer, that was another one of our lessons learned. Is in our first cell that we planted, and each one of those just shy of 200,000 plant plugs, we put a little bit of fertilizer in it. And then we realized after the grass grew to like 10 feet tall, that wasn't really necessary.
Overkill.
Yeah. So our grasses grow really, really well. Again, that sediment comes from the bottom of the bay. It's very high in organic matter and nutrients. So, and so we have this cell 1C, and I like to point out this cell a lot because we have trees on the island, and we did not plant those. So those are cottonwood trees, And what's really cool about those cottonwood trees is that they have been found by the eagles. And this year we had our first successful eagle nest on the island. You might have heard about that in the Bay Journal recently. They had a little bit of bad luck. The first year they tried to nest on the tree. They started in the end of February with their nesting, so started in November, so that didn't work out. The next year they had their nest and we thought they had eggs, but we never saw any young, so the nest failed, unfortunately, which happens. This year, they had 2 chicks and we were able to find them, we were able to band them, and then 2 weeks ago, the nest fell down.
Oh.
So seeing that, we went out there and we saw the juveniles that were there looking very confused. And so we brought them in and we checked them over just to make sure they weren't injured or anything, needing to go to the rehab. And then Fish and Wildlife Service, which comes out onto the island, one of their crew members is Craig Copey, and he's like the eagle expert. And so he does a lot of eagle monitoring, and so they came out the next day, and there's a little platform on the island, and they just threw a bunch of sticks up there, made a nest, put the babies in there, and then by the end of the day, mom and dad came back, and they fed the fish, and actually, yeah. They're like, this seems odd, but whatever, it's here, seems hungry, here's the fish.
And the kids did it.
So,
Yeah.
so that area where you're going to do deforestation, will it naturally forest itself like normally happens?
Yeah.
Where you start with a meadow, then you get shrubs, then you get trees.
So no, we don't really have any natural succession on the island, just because, which is what, that process is called, for the super biologists in the area. But with ours, we will plant it because we have a certain, with our wetlands, it's really important because we have to have a certain ratio of low marsh to high marsh grasses and certain species as well. So the grasses in the wetland areas are mainly Spartina species, and that's just because that's what it would have been in the area in the past. With our upland cells, we will hand plant them as well. What specifically we will do is to be determined. When they start planting in 2030, the first thing that they're going to plant is our test plot. And so that within that test plot, the idea is that they're going to plant things and see what works best, and then use that data to plant the remaining upland cells. So we have to take a little bit of stuff into consideration with that, where since there's a lot of layers of the dredge material, the water table is a little wonky. So we have to take that into consideration. We have to take into consideration the elevation. We have our reference sites, which is Coaches and Coaches Island, which is right next to us, so we know the trees work well there. However, the sediment is a different composition on Coaches than it will be on ours, since Coaches is in that sand bank, and we'll have that silty clay. So, and then we also, since it's much higher in elevation, we have to look at it into the wind. On one of our other sites, they did a huge planting of trees, and when a windstorm came, they'll do them all out. So that's
How much higher is it?
so the perimeter of these cells are at +8, and our upland cells will be +25.
Wow.
Yeah, and we had it that way because the wind shear in the area over here is +40, and so anything that we plant, we have to make sure, it's able to withstand, to go up to that wind shear, because if we go any higher than that, it just slices everything off. So we have to look into the age of the saplings we'll plant on there. The smaller saplings are much easier to grow, they don't take as much time, much cheaper. However, they're a lot more susceptible to large windstorms and everything. So that's just a balancing act, and that's one of the reasons why we are looking into that test plot, so that we can get that information from there.
I don't see any, are there pollinators? Do you have flowers, wildflowers?
So up here, we're pretty much on the upland cell here. So you can see the grasses here. A lot of our sloped areas, like going into our cells and going from the roadway to our upland cells, are planted with a seed mixture. We hydroseed it. So it's a seed mixture of a couple dozen plants of native grasses as well as native wildflowers. So we did that to simply attract our pollinators to the island. We are a certified monarch way station, so we get a lot of monarchs coming in during migration, and will also tag up through monarch watch. So we've been able to tag, I forgot how many they tagged last year, probably about 2,500.
So you have a banding station there?
The Fish and Wildlife will band them, so they'll get the stickers, will come out, and they'll band them. So, since you guys aren't able to go out to the island, or some of you might be coming next week, or whenever the next trip is, I only pay attention 10 hours out. So, I have a little bit of a video here. It's a little bit old, it was made in 2015, but it gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what you can expect to see on the island. Couple things for make sure put in the new information here. We're at a little over 40 at the moment of really good dark brush material. Hey. That's the selling machine.
What did you say those are?
This is cell 1A that we're looking at right now.
What are the rusted out things?
Those are barges, so they were placed here prior to construction. Once it's over, I can move back to one of the other mats. We placed them around one of those remnant islands to kind of help save it until we were able to get there for construction. Yeah, did not work. We come from there because they are different. So we're now at over 250 bird species on the island. It's my favorite part.
Oh, this is great.
And then I also like this part. Next part is everybody else's favorite part.
Those baby terrapins?
They're our baby terrapins.
Yeah.
So again, we're just shy of 100 now. But I had a kid come out on a vacation on one of our trips. He said he saw like a 15 pointer, and I'm just like,
Whoa, these been around.
yeah.
A few here.
Do you have any 19?
11 years late.
They count both sides.
Yeah. What helps is that the wetland plants we plant, they don't like eat.
Oh, God, you're so
Look at mine. Yeah.
Do you have like a field of milkweed or is it just scattered?
It's pretty much scattered. We have like 3 different species of milkweed we planted on the island. We have common milkweed, we have marsh milkweed, some bird one. I forget.
great.
Yeah, it's great. So back to those barges.
Who decides what the Army Corps of Engineer will work on? Who makes that decision of what projects?
So the Corps is pretty much involved with a lot of the dredging projects. So they're in charge of the large construction projects.
But that's my question, is it a government decision? Is there, who controls the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers?
That is their federal government. Go back. Forgot it. Okay. So if you look at, one more. So if you look at, these are where the barges are. In this image right here, you can see that we used to have that island. And so that's why.
Maybe tell the people on Zoom where you were pointing.
Yeah, so if you look at pretty much, one more, the middle circle there, you'll notice that there's something else in the water there. So those are the barges that we saw in the video. So go forward now.
Here, I can jump forward.
Okay.
See where you
Over there, 3
Think you're
barges.
ready.
9. Yeah, we put a semicircle of 9 on the island, to help just to protect one island. We're not allowed to build something out of nothing, so we have to be able to restore something. And so if everything washed away, we couldn't have done anything. So we wanted to at least protect one remnant island before we got there, because we were planning on getting there in 1998. They estimated that by 2000 things would be washed away, so that was a little bit too close for comfort for us. So our last goal is we want to make sure we cause no harm to the environment. We take this very seriously. The main thing we do is we do monitoring. So we do exterior water quality monitoring once a month throughout the months of May and October. We do sediment monitoring once a year, and that's what you see here. Getting some sediment, making sure everything's good there. We do SAV monitoring, that is submerged aquatic vegetation, and we do it 3 times per year. Usually Fish and Wildlife is in charge of that. And we do benthic monitoring, which is just looking at the composition of what's alive in the test, what we're testing. We do that once every 4 years. And so with our water quality monitoring, we will do that periodically, especially if we want to have that water to be released back out to the wild. Just naturally, since that dredged material comes from the bottom of the bay, it comes from a very anoxic or low oxygen environment. When it gets spewed out to the island, it gets introduced to sunlight and oxygen for the first time. So there's naturally chemical reactions occur, and that can cause levels of these various things to get a little out of whack. So we have certain parameters that are set by the Maryland Department for the Environment that we need to make sure that our water meets before we're able to release it out into the bay. So the ones we have limits on are turbidity, which is how turbid the water is, how clear it is. We have pH, we have total suspended solids, or TSS, and then we have our heavy metals. And then we also will measure other things that don't have limits. We'll measure dissolved oxygen, salinity, conductivity, and temperature.
Is there a certain salinity you're looking for
I would have
for the marshes?
I think with what we look for the salinity is we just compare it to what is out in the bay at that time. And just to make sure, since again, it doesn't really prevent us from releasing it into the bay, it's just a data point that we just look at. So
With the oceans warming, I would bet you this is a really, this fluctuates then.
it fluctuates every year, depending on the season.
Yeah.
Right. And it can also fluctuate daily, because things like, especially turbidity, and TSS, if we have a windy day, that will mix up things. And then with pH, that can be changed by rain. So either the lack of rain or the addition of rain, especially if the rain is acidic. So we have to look, the acid rain that we'll get can also change things. And then metals is just, chemical reactions happening as it goes on. So fortunately, if any of these are not within the limits, usually all we have to do is wait. Like I said, a lot of times wind affects it a lot, so we just need to wait for a less windy day. If it rains, we either need to wait for more rain or less rain to help that out. And then, with the metals, usually that is just, Mother Nature's pretty good at leveling herself out. So we'll pretty much just wait if any of these are not within limits, and usually after a while, we're able to release it back out to the bay.
What would you do if it was too high?
Some of the things we would do is we would kind of dilute the water out. So we have other cells that have water, so we'll have water that's good. And if we have another area with water that is not exceeding the limits, usually it's not by much, we'll dilute the water out with that. And then we haven't really done this much in the past, but HMI has, where we lime the water, or lime the area if it gets if things get too out of whack. So,
What is HMI?
Hart Miller Island, sorry. Yeah. And so it's really hard to quantify success of, the environment. We can quantify the success of the economic benefit of the island because we have those numbers, but it's really hard to quantify the ecological success. So we try, and what we do is we just quantify things. So we have just shy of 400 acres of wetlands that have been restored, and wetlands are constantly one of the most beneficial ecological habitats that you can have. And then we've been able to have over 450 bird species that have been identified on the island. I think we're now at like 47 bird species have nested on site. I updated this last year, and since we were in springtime, we were able to add killdeer onto kingfishers are this new one that we've been able to add on the island, and then our 45th species was the bald eagle. And then, as many as 1,400 terrapin hatchlings have been tagged in a single season. So those are what we have hatched on the island. Speaking of diamondback terrapins, most of the island that we made with birds in mind. This is very much an island for the birds. A lot of our habitat features, a lot of our restoration goals have been made with specific bird species in mind to help out those migratory birds. Everything else is kind of just icing on the cake. However, when we first started the project, we really quickly saw that the diamondback terrapins were really appreciative of what we were doing. So, seeing the opportunity, we reached out to Ohio University and Professor Willem Rosenberg. He's one of the top terrapin researchers in the area. He's actually from Boston, and no, Calvert County. He has a house in Boston. And so he's been out there for over 20 years. He's likely retiring this year. I'll believe it when I see it. And he and his turtle crew will come out and they want to have a hand on every single diamondback terrapin that comes onto the island. So they'll look for tracks to look for where the terrapins are nesting. They might see the terrapins actively nest, and they will find the eggs, and see who's in the nest, rebury them, mark them, and then they'll come back about 45 days later to collect the hatchlings to process them as well. So an offshoot of that is the Terrapin Education and Research Partnership, or the TERP program. So it's a program that's sponsored by the Maryland Port Administration, and it consists of 1 of 5 other partner organizations. So we have my organization, which is Maryland Environmental Service. We have the National Aquarium of Baltimore. We have 2 environmental education centers, one in Anne Arundel County, Arlington Echo, and one in Pekin County, that's just Smith Center, and then we have the University of Maryland in it as well. So what we do is that every year we get on average about 800 terrapins that will hatch on the island. The majority of them they'll collect and then they'll release back out into the wild. However, about 150 to 200 of them will be given to our organizations, and then we'll distribute them to classrooms all around the state of Maryland. And then the classrooms, students will raise them for the school year, and then after they raise them, they'll come back to Poplar Island for release. It was really, really fun. Now, all the turtles that will be captured by the turtle crew, each of them will have a pit tag in it, which is what we have one up there. That's an older version. The newer ones are about half the size of that. And it acts kind of like a microchip you would have in your pet. It doesn't actively track them, but what it does is if that turtle is ever captured again, we're able to scan it and then figure out who it was.
Where does it go?
We put the microchip in their back right leg. So it doesn't hurt them at all. So it's a really cool program. It's really nice to have the students get the connection to our Maryland State reptile, a lot of the nice cultural and natural history of the terrapin, but they also get a chance to get introduced to the scientific research process. While the turtle is in their care, they are taking measurement data for the terrapin, they are feeding the terrapin a certain diet throughout the years, they have a very strict environmental, the tank requirements for it as well. And so we also call it our Head Start program because while the turtle is in the care of these students, they grow exponentially. So when they first hatch out, they're about the size of a quarter, very tiny, and very bite-sized. But when they get released onto the island, they actually grow to the size of a 3 to 5 year old terrapin, which is about the size of kind of a baseball. And so they're a little less bite-sized, and what we found is actually, since we've been doing this for over 20 years, we found that the head started turtles actually mature a couple years earlier than their wild counterparts. So in the wild, it takes terrapins about 7 years in order to, become an adult, be able to lay eggs. With our head started terrapins, we found it only takes them about 5 years. So that's 2 extra years of egg laying from the previously impaired population. And somebody just sent me an article today that apparently in North Carolina, they're having a little bit of trouble. I haven't read it that much, but I'll have to look into that.
What was
See
the
what's
reason
going on
for
with that.
that? What was the reason?
I haven't.
What is it?
I have no idea. I need to look at the article. Somebody just sent me this morning, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. I clicked on it. It was North Carolina.
Food?
Oh, no, I think she was asking why they do better.
Oh, why they do it? Yes. So
Less stress, no predators.
Well,
yeah.
So that, right, that's what I guess.
yeah, so they don't have to worry about food because the kids are feeding them. They don't have to worry about predators unless you count small children.
They can be predators.
Yeah. They don't have to worry about their environment because they're in a very
Stress-free.
Yep. And most importantly, they don't have to worry about their winter hibernation. So they don't hibernate during the winter, so their whole time they're in the care is, all their energy is spent for
We're
growing.
at an all-inclusive resort.
Yeah. And then they come out to the island and they're like, whoa. They must prefer that.
There's other ones like me.
So Poplar Island itself has been a huge project. It's very unique, and we actually, a lot of times refer to this project as a win-win situation. It's very rarely that you find a project that not only benefits the environment at this large of a scale, but also the economy as well. So we really, really enjoy this project, really love to share it with everybody. But the project has an endpoint. We're slated to receive our last bit of dredged material in the 2030s, and we're going to restore habitat for a decade or so after that, to be completed sometimes in the 2040s. So the question is, what happens next? We do have an answer for that.
Commonly referred to as the Mid-Bay Project, 2,144 acres of badly eroded remote island habitat within Dorchester County is planned to be restored, providing capacity for at least 30 years. Located off of Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, Barren Island will receive dredge material from the Honga River to restore 72 acres of wetlands. Located off of Taylor's Island, James Island will receive dredge material from Chesapeake Bay shipping channels to restore 2,072 acres. Of that, 45% will feature upland habitat and 55% will be wetland habitat. The Mid-Bay project is currently being designed, and once construction begins, the island will take shape over the next 2 to 3 decades. An estimated 90 to 95 million cubic yards of dredge material will help form James and Barren Islands. Construction of the project is contingent on permit issuance and funding.
So that video is actually a couple years old. So James Island is slated to be starting in either next year or so. It's just south of Poplar Island, about 15 miles south off of Cambridge, off of Dorchester County. And it is going to be like Poplar Island 2.0. It's going to be a little bit larger. It'll have a little bit of a different ratio of wetland to uplands. It'll have a 45% wetlands, 55% uplands, 45% wetlands. And so it'll be a little bit larger. It'll be about 2,000 acres, and it'll have a lot more capacity, about 90 million cubic yards. So it's going to be, again, it's going to start in the next year or so, and it's going to be pretty interesting with how they do it. They're just planning on, just like Poplar Island, they have to construct it first, and they're planning to receive the material by the 2030s.
And are these islands, including Poplar Island, I'm assuming they're always going to be protected?
It depends on what it's going to be slated for. So, like, Poplar Island is slated for beneficial use. It's slated for kind of a wildlife sanctuary. So, once we're done with it, we are going to give it over to the state of Maryland. What specific organization, we haven't really decided on that yet. But the idea is, if it gets used for anything, it's going to be passive recreation. So, unlike Hart Miller Island, which is an active recreation site. So, in Hart Miller, you have beach, you have the 5K that goes along there, they have trails that people go through with the DNR site. On Poplar, the idea is that there's going to be no permanent buildings there, no hard surface trails, maybe some soft surface trails, maybe things like kayaking and birding, but nothing really much else. And James Island, the idea is going to be very similar to that. Barren Island is going to be pretty similar to that as well, just because they're only restored wetlands. And that is the big thing about Barren Island. It is a barrier island, so it's aiming to help protect Dorchester County with its restoration.
Does passive recreation mean it's restricted access, or once it's opened up, anybody can go out there if they can get out there?
I'm not sure. It would probably just depend on what organization is looking at it. It's just like the areas here where we have recreational areas that are more passive, that are more contained than other areas. Like, I would say, and then we have like purely sanctuary areas. There's like one in the Tunis Mills area that is just a wildlife area that doesn't really have any like trails or anything going through it.
Are pleasure boats allowed to dock at Poplar Island?
Not at the moment. Since it's classified as a federal construction site, everybody that comes on the island requires prior authorization. So we do offer, that's why we offer the public tours, is that so that we can bring the general public out. But we're still restricted with where we have to go and everything.
I'm just wondering, on some of the smaller, we live on Broad Creek, and we've watched over the last 25 years the little Hamilton Islands disappear. Is there ever a time, or a private citizen consortium that would come together that could restore an island that would be a barrier? I mean, those are living there. I mean, it's still there, but there's less and less and less of it.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I'm sure we have been seeing a lot more like private companies trying to
Pull it back.
trying to, coming up, because dredging and using better for reuse and doing things like the shorelines and stuff is very much, popular right now. So I'm not sure, I don't really have any examples off the top of my head, but I do know that there has been like rumors of things like other corporations trying to get in on it type of thing. So.
If you were interested in finding out if there is such a movement for a specific island, which of the state would it be your agent, which of the state offices would?
I would look at the DNR, the DNR dredging website.
Oh, there is something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to see what's going on, because there's a lot of things that go into choosing a site. We have to have a lot of different things to take into consideration, especially with things on this large of a scale. So it's hard to look at, there's a lot of factors that go into it, especially with the cost effectiveness of it. So, it's just things that we have to look at that too. But, so Barren Island actually started last year in March. And I believe it's up to, they're restoring 84 acres now. 85, there we go. And so if you ever go down in this Fishing Creek area and look out, you'll see they're working there. They're currently working on getting the perimeter of the island, and they're going to be starting to bring in dredge material sometime in the near future. And so with Barren Island, it's not getting any material from the shipping channels that we'll get it from, that Poplar gets it from, and that James will get it from. They're getting material from the Hunger River channel, so it's a little bit different than that. So that is a more localized channel, localized area that they're working on. But since it's still a federal navigation channel, that's why the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is involved with it. So we do offer tours to the island. You guys are aware of them. They are free of charge for what we offer. We do 3 main types of tours. We do our general tours where it's just general public. That's what we'll have for you guys. The tour that we have for you guys. It's pretty much we offer them every day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Fridays. We don't offer them Thursdays until we do board meetings. And then it is 9 a.m. to noon. All of our tours leave from our Tillman Island land-based dock. And it's about a half-hour boat ride to the island, 2-hour bus ride around the island, and then a half-hour boat ride back to the island. So the tour will be very similar to this. We'll talk about the history, we'll talk about the construction process, but we'll be able to see what's currently going on the island and kind of see certain things in person. I can talk about this island, forever, but you don't really get the experience how vast and how amazing the island is until you get on there.
Can people just call and see if there is an empty seat that they can get on?
Oh yeah. I have my card there that has both the phone number and the email address that you can reach out to. I will say I am very much behind, like 4 weeks behind, with catching emails and everything. But everybody who has contacted me, it's pretty much everything's at a standstill since I've been on tours the entire day. We just finished our school tours, which is what we also offer during the months of April and May. Usually those are booked solid even before January because they are our terrapin releases and they have to come up to the island. So they get first dibs. And so throughout the months of April and May, it's pretty much all day, every day, terrapin releases. And we actually, with some of our partner organizations, the National Aquarium and Arnold and Echo, we offer 3 tours a day. So my day starts at 8:30 and ends at 2:30. And that leaves about 45 minutes of email and phone message time. So I'm gonna get caught up with that.
You need an intern.
I know. Yeah, we usually have 2 to 4 people. One of them, she actually just got a new job, which we're pretty excited about. So it was a great opportunity for her. But we're in the process of getting another person, but it's overwhelming because we're just so popular. And then in the center there, we have our birding tour. So all of our sites that I showed you, last year we were in the top 10 birding spots according to eBird in Maryland. So.
And we have a date in fall for
Yes.
a birding tour.
Yes.
Have we already signed up for that one? Has that gone out?
Well, no, you won't be able to register until.
Oh, yeah, signed up, we haven't missed it.
Yeah, no,
So you're doing 2 in the summer, aren't you?
we're doing one in the summer that you would have seen on our email, and that one we're inviting.
We're at Barrington,
Grandkids
yeah,
too.
we're at Barrington Grandchild, yeah.
And then the other one will be birding, and there'll be 2 sessions like this. There'll be classroom, and then there'll be out in the field.
And I'll identify
You
coworkers
do
who
the
aren't
tours
that.
every day, or they're just certain days?
So the birding tours, they're a little bit more limited, so we will offer birding tours for a general tour spot, 9 a.m. to noon. We do also have scheduled birding tours that we will offer up, and those, we usually have about 8 or 9 of them every year, and they are from 9 to 1:30. So they are a little bit longer, you have to be on the distribution list. And those have changed this year because we actually created a birding registration site. And that is for all of our DMMP sites. So, and those are special scheduled tours that are for birding tours. However, we do have the general tour spots, like you have, if you have a group that's interested in birding and we have spots, we're more than happy to accommodate for that. So we do a lot on the island. We do that because our project partners want us to make sure that we are showing what we're doing to the general public. It's pretty scary to, see these big construction workers coming to, your waterfront and depositing dirt that, historically has had a little bit of a bad rap. So we want to make sure we're able to share this with people so that, they know what we're doing and they try to, show that, we're doing good.
Are those stones similar to what you used originally to create a barrier around the perimeter?
I'm sure we got them very similarly. They were placed there, that's what we call our Murder Memorial Site, and so that's kind of a meeting spot. So they was placed there so that people can meet and sit down. So I don't know the history of those stones. I know they were placed out there in 2004.
Is that the size?
It varies. Yeah, some of them will look pretty tiny, and then some of them are pretty large. So I have no gauge of how much those weigh because we just did a landscaping area there because we were actually able to bring the headstones, a couple of the headstones back from the town that used to be here, and so we were landscaping the area with pea gravel so that people can walk and look at the headstones. And it was like 3 tons, but the bags were like 3 duffel bag size. And I'm like, that's a ton of rocks.
Amazing, I know.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I just have no gauge of how much rocks weigh. So if you're interested in tours and more about Poplar Island, you're more than welcome to go to our website. Oops, oh, there's more there. PoplarIslandRestoration.com. It will have more information about it. We have our document section that you look up stuff. We have an online form where you can reach out to the tours and see what's open there. So it's pretty good website. I like it a lot. And then we also want to shout out our project partners and the project teams. Again, we have the 2 main project partners, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and MPA. But we're certainly not the only ones there. So we have my organization, Maryland Environmental Service. We have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS. We have NOAA that'll come out there, Maryland Natural Resources, Maryland Department of the Environment, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and we also have Salisbury University that comes out for a project, as well as Ohio University with the Carrots. So, very much a project where we have a lot of hands on it. So there's my information if you want to reach me directly, and then if you're just interested in tours, stuff, it all comes to me. You can go there.
We've already heard about the
Yeah.
backlog.
Yes.
Now we know why, it's an all concern.
Yeah, so we're working on it. So we've just been getting a lot of new stuff in, and it's like it's been busy season. And we've had a lot of television people out and other people out, so it's just my time has just been dragged.
So do we have any questions from those people on Zoom? Looks like Joe. You're good?
This is a good time.
No, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to come up with other things to talk to us about when we take the tour?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of this is just like background information, and it's different when you're there at the time.
Yeah.
And there's always something new and exciting on the island, and there's
We
always.
never get off the bus though, we're always continuing.
There will be some times when you will get off the bus and mill about certain areas, but there's no like active hiking areas or like walking around too much. And then you're always welcome if you want to stay on the bus, you're more than welcome to do that.
So how many of you know where this is? That we're meeting on Monday? So if you aren't familiar with it, make sure you get there before 9 o'clock because the boat leaves at 9 o'clock.
Yes.
She'll start boarding and handing out life jackets probably 10 minutes before.
Yeah, usually 5 to 10 minutes. We usually encourage people to arrive about 15 minutes early. Just to account for things happening. St. Michael's is the best right now. And then we always have the bridge that connects Tillman to Sherwood area that goes up and down.
Yep.
And we'll be going through that, so we'll be getting that.
I copied all of her information into the memo that's gonna go out.
And there's about, and there's a restroom there.
For quarter gen.
Yeah, we have porta potties on our land base, and then on the island, usually about an hour in, we will stop at our tour, what we call our tour room, and that has bathroom facilities in there as well.
But to get there, just really simple. You're gonna go all the way out to Tillman Island, you're gonna cross the bridge, the first left street, not the first left, which is a big parking lot for some,
It's Tillman Wharf out there, yeah.
you go to the street, and that is, what's the name of that?
Chicken Point Road.
Chicken Point Road. You're gonna turn left there, and then a little ways down, you'll see a sign for the Poplar Island tours, and you'll turn there. Now, if you get there early, you might be surprised, because there'll be other cars there already, because they ferry workers over and back and forth, so they have to park someplace.
Yep.
So just kind of make sure you plan a little early. I think earlier in the day, I told someone, we guessed it's like half an hour from Easton or this side, the other side of East, the St. Michael side of East.
City on the brick project.
When we're Easton Club East, knowing that we need to be there earlier, I would probably leave an hour early, so.
Is it rain or shine?
It is rain or shine. The only thing that will really hinder us going out is wind. So all of our boats are made to be out in weather. Everything is covered. If it starts raining or anything, usually it's only pretty much the wind that'll injure us. And I looked at the weather. I don't believe we have anything coming up, but I keep an eye on it.
Yeah, at one time, we couldn't go on the tour because there was something wrong with the motor on the boat.
Oh yeah.
So Christina and I just put our heads together and found another date and shifted everybody over to that other date.
Yeah.
So,
Cameras are allowed.
oh yeah, and bring binoculars, bring a hat.
Yeah. The only thing we don't really allow is drones. Better than drones.
Roads. Oh, well.